I was doing what's called a table signing, which is, you know, it's not advertised ahead of time, but there's a sign on the bookshop window, let's say, you know, and I come at a certain time and just talk to whoever happens to be in the store. So I arrived, and a tourist passing by had stopped for coffee like 5 minutes before I got there. He and his companions had driven all the way from North Carolina. And the book that he got to read on the trip was The Marsh King's Daughter. Can you imagine?
Oh
And so they stop at Falling Rock, you know, to get a coffee, and the author's going to be there in 5 minutes.
how serendipitous.
I know. You know, so I talked with them, and that was fun. And I said, did you buy a lottery ticket today too?
Oh, definitely.
That was fun.
So Victor, since it's 5 after 2, did you want to?
Yeah, let's get on with the presentation. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Q&A. Those of you who aren't that familiar with Zoom, there's a nice raise hand feature you can use while we're talking. On the PC, hit Alt-Y or Option-Y on the Macintosh. Also, feel free to write stuff in the chat room, and Brandy will be taking care of that, making sure I don't miss any questions. Or you can also raise your hand at the bottom of the Zoom screen with the big hand icon and click raise hand, the same button you'll hit to lower hand when your question has been received. I'll just talk a little bit about UPPAA for everyone who's tuning into the broadcast on YouTube later on and doesn't know what UPPAA is. We're a locally sourced authors group, and we have a lot of things. I'm just going to talk about a few highlights here in a couple of minutes. Our spring conference would normally be our best feature. That has been pushed back to September. We've got some great speakers lined up. And our other big initiatives are the UP Reader, which is a collection of writings from 30 to 40 of our members, which is all run through a jury and published every year in paperback, hardcover, and ebook, and maybe someday an audiobook when we get to it. And the Dandelion Short Story Contest, something I'm really proud of, which allows students in the UP from grades 5 through 12 to compete in a story writing contest with cash prizes. We'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, the Short Story Award is there's no charge to enter, and the students are helped by the teachers who submit their actual work for the Dandelion Cottage Award. And the deadline, I believe, is always January 31st. So the next one coming up will be January 31st, 2021. And the great thing is there's never a charge to enter, and it's a lot of fun. Here's a couple of our winners from this year, May Amelia Shapton and Megan Sutherland. We've had a lot of great entries from the Western UP, so we're really looking for the Eastern UP to pick up the slack this year. The UP Reader is our juried annual anthology. Anyone who's a UPPAA member can contribute. There's no cost to contribute to the anthology, and you get a free copy as well as a perpetual 50% off discount. It's a great deal. You can find Karen Dionne's keynote from last year published in its entirety in this year's UP Reader, which is number 4. And there's also information from the Q&A, which she did, which doesn't appear in the book, but it's on our UPPAA.org website. So, and I'm really hoping that we capture this year's event right now, and we'll have some of it in UP Reader number 5. We are doing our unconference starting in Saturday, September 12th, which is going to be kicked off by Carolyn Howard Johnson, who's kind of a legend in the marketing books community. She's recently released her 3rd edition of the Frugal Book Promoter. It is just jam-packed with 1,000 ideas, most of which cost nothing or very, very little. Anyone who's a UPPAA member is encouraged to tune in to our unconference starting in September. And it runs all the way through the end of October. We've got Donna Winters, who's written, I'm going to say almost 20 or more than 20 romance books talking about the ins and outs of romance writing. Marquette's own Tyler Tischler, who needs no introduction. And we'll have other speakers, Amy Bissonnet on self-publishing children's fiction. Naomi Rawlings will be talking about back to basics character development. And Jensina Grossman will be doing our much requested self-publishing 101. It's a great way to get yourself started in the book business. This year, for the first time, we have our fiction writing workshop, which is going to be done completely online over the course of October 9th and 10th. The registration fee is a ridiculously low $40, which anywhere else would be at least $100, but we're sensitive to the UP community and its needs. You just have to be an active member to participate. We have Doug and Bethany Leonard on tap from the Red Oar Writers, and they're really excited to do this. All right, let's get right down to business here. We have Karen Dionne on the line, who is, of course, the author of March King's Daughter, an amazing bestseller. It's, I don't know how many countries it's in, but 25 languages. I'm going to say at least 40 countries. As Karen was mentioning before we started rolling the tape, she had to cancel her book tour in the UP for reasons everybody understands, but we will have book plates for her available at Snowbound Books in Marquette and Falling Rock in Munising. So it's just a cool little sticker with her actual signature on that you can affix to the inside of your book, just as if it had been signed in person. So The Wicked Sister is going on sale August 4th. So I'm pretty sure I'm the only one in the room who's read it. We're going to have a little discussion about some of the themes of the book, and I've sort of structured it so we won't get into spoiler territory. I hope you find it interesting. We'll also be talking about the process of writing itself and the creative decisions that Karen has made along the way. In addition to the recent books she's written, she has a long history, deep history with the writing community, specifically the Backspace organization, which was a huge help to many people online, and organized those conferences in New York. And she's also a member of the International Thriller Writers, where she served as managing editor of their publication and on the board of directors. So she's really involved in the author community, and it's just amazing to be in touch with someone who's really giving back to help people get started in their careers. So The Wicked Sister, I've got a basic synopsis which sort of brings us to the start of the story. Involves Rachel Cunningham as our protagonist. She's been locked away in a psychiatric facility for 15 years. Originally, she was committed by her parents, and then she's voluntarily recommitted herself as an adult because she is dead certain that she is the one that caused her parents' deaths. But a surprise visitor brings a revelation to find out that she is not responsible. And of course, she wants to return to her home and the so-called scene of the crime, which is a log cabin in the remote areas of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. So that's a basic sourcing from where we're going to start. And let me end the share. All right. So Karen, when we last spoke, it was June 5th, 2019, and you had just turned in the manuscript for The Wicked Sister. It might have been after an all-night writing session. I'm not sure. Tell us about what happened. What happens after you submitted the book to the publisher? How does that work?
Yeah, well, that was a very memorable day because I was late with the manuscript, and my publisher had given me an extension. But that Saturday that I keynoted at the conference, that was the hard and fast deadline. I had to turn it in that day no matter what, or I was in deep trouble. And so I had been touring several places through the western end of the UP. My daughter was with me to do the driving. I was working on my laptop in the car. Each morning I was getting up earlier and earlier. So the morning of the keynote, I got up at 4 a.m. and I worked solid from 4 a.m. till 9 when it was due. It was due at 9. Never budged from that hotel chair, which was very hard chair and, you know, sent it off, went over to the conference, and, you know, then later in the afternoon, I just crashed in the hotel room for several hours. So what happened next then after that was my editor, of course, read the manuscript, you know, very quickly because of the time frame, because it had been overdue, and we were hoping it takes a year to get a novel from, you know, accepted by the editor to in bookstore shelves. So, you know, we were in a hurry for it. So, you know, he read it, he gave me some comments. I quickly reworked the comments, you know, he was happy with it. And so we had what's called a final manuscript by about the middle of July. And then after that, everything is out of my hands at that point. Then the publisher, you know, they have it, the manuscript copy edited. And of course, then I give input on the copy edits. The art department starts working on a cover for the book. And, you know, all of these internal things, there's the sales team that has an early read, and they determine what they're going to do for marketing and start trying to create buzz for the book. So all that happens behind the scenes for when you're published with a major publisher like that. So so yeah, that day was a very, very special day. I will never forget it.
That's great. So you get, is it basically one galley that comes back later and you get a chance to redline it, or?
Well, when the copy edits come back, an author still has a chance to make fairly substantial changes. But once you get what are called page proofs, that's where the manuscript pages have been typeset exactly as they will appear in the book. Then any changes that the author makes, if you make substantive changes, you have to pay for that book to be retypeset. So there are a couple of opportunities for the author to make adjustments, you know, if a sentence doesn't sit right, or, you know, you thought of a detail that needed to be added. But even pretty far along in the process, one of my foreign publishers, one of the I think it was Sweden, the translator noted what was really an actual mistake that none of the copy editors had caught in the US edition. And so I wrote to my editor and I said, can we fix this? Is there time to fix this? And it was right before the books had actually gone to the printer. And he said, yes, there is time to fix it. It was a small change, but it was an important one. So there are a lot of eyes on the book, which I'm grateful for, because, you know, as an author, you can't catch everything. It really helps to have other people, you know, making sure that the book is accurate internally and, you know, accurate to its setting and history and surroundings as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I've just finished my 40th audiobook recording, and almost everyone, the narrator finds a mistake. And
Yeah.
The last one, the detective met a witness twice for the first time. But anyway, that stuff happens. Okay, you mentioned before that the movie rights have been acquired and casting was going on. Can you bring us up to date on that? And do you have any input as to the teleplay?
Yeah, you know, it's super exciting that The Marsh King's Daughter has been optioned for film. That's something that I never dreamed might happen, to be honest. As I was writing the book, I was writing a book. I wasn't thinking in terms of movie. I know some authors do. Sometimes they're imagining an actor or an actress, you know, as the character as they're writing. I did not. So it was a big surprise to me when there was film interest for the story. Since that time, we've had 4 directors and 2 actresses attached to the project.
Wow.
So early on, my agent told me, don't get excited. It's Hollywood. It's very volatile, you know, until they actually make the movie, anything can change. And I've certainly seen some of that happen. Where we stand right now, the production company is still very much behind the movie. They just asked for an extension of the option because, you know, the COVID-19 shutdowns have affected everything drastically there. I have not heard any word on when they might start shooting. There is an A-list actress attached, and I can't say who. It's not my news to share, but yeah, it's I think people would be pretty excited. So I'm hoping that, you know, Hollywood will start to open up soon and things might get moving again. I've been told, not specifically with regard to my story, but in general, that in Hollywood, the first movies to get back into production would be ones with a small cast that take place outdoors.
Oh,
So,
awesome.
marketing fits. We'll see what happens.
Great. I'd like to shift into full Wicked Sister mode here, and I understand that you've been agonizing over an excerpt to read. Are you ready to do that?
I did. I'm going to read from the opening because it really, I think, sets the stage for the book.
I agree.
So, oh, thank you. So, as Victor said, the basic story is that my character, Rachel Cunningham, she grows up in this beautiful log cabin. It's southeast of Marquette. It's fictitious, but it's on a piece of property that's very isolated. It's 4,000 acres that have been in the family for generations. And her parents are wildlife biologists, and she follows her mother and father around in the woods. Her mother studies black bears. Rachel feels a very strong connection to black bears in the story. But the novel does not open with her, you know, happily following her mother in the woods on her rounds. She's in the mental hospital because she believes she's responsible for that tragic shooting accident that took her parents' lives when she was 11. So this is how the story begins in her voice. Rachel says, "Sometimes when I close my eyes, there is a rifle in my hands. My hands are small, my fingers are pudgy. I'm 11 years old. There's nothing special about this particular rifle, nothing to distinguish it from any other Remington, except that this is the rifle that killed my mother. In my vision, I am standing over my mother. The rifle is pointing at her chest. Her mouth is open and her eyes are closed. Her chest is red. My father runs into the front hallway. 'Rachel,' he screams when he sees me. He drops to his knees, gathers my mother in his arms, looks up at me, his expression an unfamiliar jumble of shock and horror. He rocks my mother for a long time, as if she is a baby, as if she is alive. At last he lays her gently on the worn parquet floor and gets slowly to his feet. He takes the rifle from my trembling hands and looks at me with a sorrow greater than I can comprehend and turns the rifle on himself. 'Not so,' says the golden orb spider from the middle of her web in the corner of my room where the cleaners never sweep. 'Your father killed your mother, and then he killed himself.' I don't understand why the spider is lying. Spiders normally tell the truth. 'How do you know?' I can't resist asking. 'She wasn't there when my parents died. I was.' The spider regards me solemnly from 8 shiny eyes. 'I know,' she says. 'We all know.' Her spiderlings skitter about the edges of the web as insubstantial as dust motes and nod. I want to tell the spider that she is wrong, that I know better than anyone what happened the day my parents died, and I understand the consequences of my childhood crime better than she ever will, because I've been living with them for 15 years. Once you've taken someone's life, it breaks you, shatters you into so many infinitesimal pieces that no one and nothing can put you together again. Ask any drunk driver who killed a pedestrian, any hunter who thought the friend or brother-in-law he shot was a deer, anyone who held a loaded rifle when she was too young to anticipate what was about to happen. My therapists say I'm suffering from complicated grief disorder and promise I'll get better in time. My therapists are wrong. I'm getting worse. I can't sleep, and when I do, I have nightmares. I get frequent headaches and my stomach hurts all the time. I used to think constantly about killing myself until I realized that living in a mental hospital for the rest of my life is the greater punishment. I eat, I sleep, I read, I watch TV, I go outside. I breathe the warm summer air, feel the sun on my skin, listen to the birds chirp and the insects hum. Watch the flowers bloom and the leaves turn and the snow fall, and through it all, always, always in the front of my mind and deep in my heart burns this terrible truth. I am the reason my parents will never see, smell, taste, laugh, or love again. My parents are dead because of me. The police ruled my parents' death a murder-suicide perpetrated by my father. All the news reports I've been able to find agree. Peter James Cunningham, age 45, murdered his wife, Jennifer Marie Cunningham, age 43, for undetermined reasons, and then turned the rifle on himself. Some speculate that I saw my father shoot my mother and that's why I ran away. Others that I found my parents' bodies and this is what sent me over the edge. I would have told them that I was responsible if I had been able to speak. When I came out of my catatonia 3 weeks later, I made sure that everyone who would listen knew what I had done. But to this day, no one believes me, not even the spider.
Thank you for that. That was a great reading. You've got a
Nice.
great reading voice.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that just gives us several enigmas that pull me along. I have to keep reading. I have to find out what's going on. That is just awesome. All right, let's talk a little bit about bears in your story. It's not in the excerpt, but it's a theme all the way through the book. The bears are both a source of danger and comfort to the characters. For example, Rachel has a stuffed bear, and of course, there's a extremely rare white albino bear that she befriends. On the other hand, the bears are a constant potential threat to the family as they're studying them. Bear caves also play a pivotal role at the end of the story. And you even have a lot of detail on the Oswald Bear Ranch. Do you yourself have a personal fascination or a story about bears that you can share with us?
Well, when my husband and I lived in the UP, we moved from the Detroit area as a young married couple in the early 1970s as part of the Back to the Land movement. And we built a little cabin while we lived in a tent and carried water from a stream and sampled wild foods. So I had not had any direct contact with bears. I could have. There was one day when I was heading for an old apple orchard behind our house where there were some blackberries. I was going to pick those blackberries and some choke cherries and make jelly. My infant daughter was on my back, in a backpack. And walking down the road, I came upon a pile of bear dung, and it wasn't too fresh, so I wasn't too worried. I kept going, but the piles just kept getting fresher and fresher.
Hi.
I decided that, running from a bear with my baby on the back, this was probably not a good idea. So, I turned around and went home. But I think what has fascinated me about bears is, for one thing, black bears are Michigan's largest predator. And it felt right to feature them in the book, but I wanted to feature them not as something to fear, but as, a creature to be respected. And so I did visit Oswald's Bear Ranch, to do research. And I talked to Dean Oswald quite a little bit and learned a lot about, what it's like to care for bears. I badly wanted to go inside one of the enclosures with him, but his liability insurance didn't allow it. So I had to just stand outside. It's probably just as well, but yeah, I like bears. And so it was a pleasure to me to give Rachel this particular love for bears as well, because it's always fun when your characters share something in common with yourself.
Yeah, the white bear is almost a character. Well, he is a character in the story, and it's fascinating to have a little bit of an animal companion. Let's segue over to fairy tales, which seem to be a big influence for you. In this book, you've cited Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel, Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, the Willow Wren, Red Riding Hood, Robin Hood and the 12 Huntsmen, and there's probably more I missed, and of course the Marsh King's Daughter. How do you see these ancient tales impacting us centuries on?
Yeah, I think many readers cut their teeth on fairy tales. Show of hands, who read fairy tales when you were little? All the hands go up, right?
Right.
And I was no exception. I've got my childhood fairy tale books on the shelf behind me here, and I think I read them. These are the unabridged versions, and I read them when I was maybe 8 or 9. But the language is so lush, for one thing, and then I think the other appeal of fairy tales that makes them so timeless is, generally speaking, they end justice is served. So the protagonist of the fairy tale, it ends happily ever after, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the bad character gets their comeuppance. Generally speaking, there are exceptions, of course. And I think that pattern of storytelling is something that just really strikes a chord with us, no matter what generation we are.
Cool. That's nice to see that kind of tradition sort of carried forward. Let's talk about the setting a little bit. More so than The Marsh King's Daughter, this book seems to paint a vibrant picture of the UP with its natural resources and history. In The Marsh King, at least to me, the UP seems to be primarily a harsh and bleak climate of extreme cold and in the summer extreme heat and everything.
And bugs, extreme bugs.
Extreme bugs. Yes. In this book, you go out of your way to explain some of the background with iron mining and so on. I'll just read a short passage, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Our cliff is part of the Marquette Iron Range, one of 3 iron-rich mountain ranges in the western UP. Most of the cities on this end of the UP were founded due to mining. Marquette, Ironwood, Iron River, Ishpeming, Negaunee, and some depend on mining to this day. Peter's grandfather likes to show off a copper nugget the size of a baseball that he claims was found on our property, and things on that nature. Was this a conscious choice for this book to go further into geographic details?
It was, and that's interesting that you spotted that in the reading, because the reaction to The Marsh King's Daughter, as was mentioned, it's been translated in 25 languages, and so it's been published in a lot of countries around the world. Many people write to me and say that they're fascinated by the Upper Peninsula. Some even plan trips here. I don't know if that happened or not, but they claim that the book inspired them to go and visit the UP. But I realized that all readers in those other places knew about the Upper Peninsula was what I put in the book, right? Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, okay, if people are that fascinated with the Upper Peninsula, I'm fascinated. I'm going to sneak in a little more of the history and the geography of the area. So that was definitely something that was in my mind, including those details.
That's cool. That's a nice little, I don't know, sort of Easter egg for the reader.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of related. You seem to have a great appreciation for the beauty of the natural world. Is that something that you grew up with?
You know, I actually grew up, I guess you'd say, in the city or in the suburbs. Well, my family moved to the Detroit area from Ohio when I was 8, and I grew up in Grosse Pointe Woods. So, you know, you would think that's pretty far from, you know, the woods and then the natural world. But my family always went camping, and I loved it. You know, I loved exploring the sand dunes and the woods. And even as a child, I would collect the little pine cones. And my mother tells a story about, apparently I discovered tent caterpillars, and I thought they were the coolest thing ever. And brought a whole box full back to the campsite.
Oh my gosh.
So I think that's where, you know, the initial love of the natural world came from. And as I said, my husband and I moved to the Upper Peninsula in the early 1970s because we wanted to be closer to nature all the time. And we lived in the Upper Peninsula for 30 years. So it just speaks to me. You know, everybody has their preferences, but I have sometimes said, if you were to show me 10 pictures of places that I could live, from the most congested, like New York City, to gradually the least congested, like a mountaintop in Tibet, well, I would pick the mountaintop in Tibet. There's just something about the emptiness and the natural world that really speaks to me. And so I love the Upper Peninsula, and it's been a joy to write 2 characters who also love the natural world. And interestingly, in the 3rd book that I'm working on now, it's set in Grand Marais, and Lake Superior features largely in this 3rd story. But I'm writing it from the point of view of someone who moves up from the Detroit area. So she doesn't know anything about the area. And so it's all first impressions, right? You know, she's never seen a Great Lake before because she was a city kid. So I'm having fun with that, you know, basically going back to that first year that we were in the UP and everything was fresh and new.
That's great. Everyone loves a fish out of water story. It's the basis for a lot of series television. All right. I've got one more locale question, so let's get to that. It takes place on a family resort about 45 miles from Marquette. That reminded me of a famous naturalist, wildlife photographer, George Shiras III. His family retreat was called Whitefish Lake, which is now a state park in, I don't know, sort of the same area. Was the estate in the story modeled after any kind of real life retreat?
You know, I did not know about that when I created my little world. I knew I was going to set the book in the forest, and the Marsh King's Daughter takes place in the marshland, in the Tequamatum River Valley. And I wanted something that was the opposite. So in the Marsh King's Daughter, Helena lives in complete isolation and just basically a ramshackle old house. So what's the opposite? You know, a beautiful mansion. And also, when my husband and I lived in the Upper Peninsula for a lot of years, we did furniture upholstery. So I've been in some of these beautiful log cabins, you know, as a tradesman. And so I wanted to set it, you know, the nice part about fiction is you can create it however you like. So I give this log cabin a copper roof and stained glass windows, and you know, it's really over the top because it's fiction. You can make it up how you want. Later, I realized that Marquette has granite loma, you know, which is like the largest log cabin in the world. And so I used some of the pictures from that as I was imagining the interior in The Wicked Sister. But was that setting inspired by them? No, but there are shades of that. When I heard about the estate that you're talking about, I almost felt like, well, yes, okay, I was on the right track when I made up mine.
Yeah, the descriptions of the log cabin are so vivid. I feel like I can really puts me in the room. So
Nice.
love that part. Let's talk a little bit into the characterization. To me, this seems to be strongly a women's story. At least 5 of the major characters are all women, and the male characters are all somewhat tangential, and even the father figure of Peter Cunningham seems to be weak. Was that an intentional choice?
I do tend to push the less important characters way in the background. I've noticed that. In The Marsh King's Daughter, of course, the story was all about Helena's relationship with her father, the Marsh King's daughter. And her mother is so beaten down and so ignored by the father and by Helena then too, because that's what she learns, that in the story, she doesn't even have a name. So
Right.
I figured this time I'm doing pretty good. At least Rachel's father gets a name in this story. So
I love stories about powerful women. So
yeah, well, and this is called The Wicked Sister. Obviously, Rachel has a sister, and so the core of this story is their relationship. Rachel's mother also tells her half of the story in the past, and she too has a sister. I had 2 sisters, so you know, that's why it's a little female heavy, I think.
cool. All right, let's get a little bit into the psychology of one of the characters, Diana, the psychopathic child. And I was doing some thinking about that. And the psychopathic child is a recurring theme over a lot of literature and film. I'm thinking of William March's The Bad Seed. Why do you think that is? And what does that say about believing that people are basically good, or at least born with a tabula rasa? Any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
My thoughts differ a little bit. So when I knew that Rachel's sister was going to be a psychopath, and that's not really a spoiler. You guys will figure that out pretty early on if you read the novel. I knew that that's what she would be, but I wanted to depict her realistically. You know, it isn't like in the movies where, you know, a psychopath just goes around killing people because they apparently enjoy killing. The more that I read about true psychopaths, they don't enjoy killing. They don't get pleasure from it, but what they will kill if it somehow serves their purpose. So in the case of Diana, I wanted to show the tragedy of a family who has a deeply disturbed child, because when I knew a family that had they adopted 3 siblings. Sorry.
Sure.
Stumbled a little there. They adopted 3 siblings, and the 2 younger siblings did very well in the new environment, but the older sibling, he had some serious issues, and he was violent towards his younger brother and sister, and eventually at the age of 12 they had to institutionalize him. And to me, that's like a Sophie's choice sort of thing. You know, how as a parent do you make this decision? You love your children, you love all of them, you know, to send one away for the sake of the other two. So that's the core question that I'm working with in telling the story in the past from Rachel's mother's point of view. You know, she knows that her daughter has you would say violent tendencies, or she's unrestrained. And so, you know, and she doesn't show any care and empathy. So at what point does, you know, does the parent say, this is out of our control, we can't handle this? Obviously, because they end up dead, she waited too long. But that's one of the things that I wanted to depict in the story, was just the dilemma for the parent of a child who has severe issues like that, and what it's like to deal with that.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thread to follow in there. I found it interesting that the psychiatrist says, and I'll quote, "It is important to understand that her condition is not your fault, no more than if Diana had been born with any other non-heritable birth defect."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in my research, most psychologists say that psychopathy can't be diagnosed in children until like the age of 18. But there's a few and a growing number who feel that they can diagnose it in children as young as 3, 4, 5. So these tendencies do show themselves. And sadly, in the early parts of the book, most of the incidents that I have Diana be involved in are true. Other children have really done those things. So I won't get specific as to what they are, but you know, it's a real issue, a real problem that shows itself early.
Right. So that answered that question. Diana seems to follow the classic route where people on the road to becoming serial killers, they have a path of desensitization. They start out by hurting, you know, maybe frogs or small animals, and moving up the scale to people. Is this something that you found as a pattern in your research?
Yeah, I don't see it that way. And this is probably a good time to explain. I've already mentioned that Rachel's parents, and of course her sister Diana too, they're wildlife biologists. So when Diana, even as a child, let's say dissects an animal, she's not doing it out of cruelty. She's doing it as a scientist would. You know, she's thinking, well, you know, I want to know what's inside. And so
Ah,
the things that she does are basically like a scientific experiment, but without that filter of, you know, wait a minute, I'm killing this other creature unnecessarily, or whatever else it might be. So it, like I say, it's a more cerebral than an emotional thing with her. So I don't see it as so much as escalating as just her life is one big experiment trying to understand the world, and it might involve harming something or someone.
got it. It's like an extreme detachment. That's
Yes,
very interesting.
right. That's right.
Let's talk a little bit more about the character development. I first ran into the idea of an unreliable narrator in some old film noir movies where things are told from one person's point of view, and then there's like a huge shift, and then you think, well, maybe that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
It's a literary tradition that mixes reality with delusion or fantasy. Is Rachel an example of an unreliable narrator, do you think, or does she really have the ability to communicate with the spiders and so on?
Yeah, you know, I'm leaving the final call on that to the reader.
Somehow I knew you would.
Yes, yes. The thing is, we've all known of people who have such a strong connection, usually not to all animals, but one particular one, that, you know, where does the idea of a horse whisperer, or, you know, these people who are like so connected to lions or tigers that they can just interact with them in amazing ways. So, you know, I'm thinking of that. However, Rachel has had severe trauma as a child, and she made no effort to get better for a lot of years. So maybe it's all in her head, and that's going to be up to the reader to make up their mind.
Cool. It's always good to leave some things open-ended.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the writing process, I was really hooked by the way that you managed to interleave chapters in two different settings, and each one ended up on a cliffhanger, especially towards the end of the book. Uh, that must have been difficult. Did you have a way to work that out?
You know, cliffhangers are fun, especially, you know, if you're writing suspense or thrillers or psychological suspense, because, you know, you carefully bring the reader to this moment, and then you don't let them have the resolution yet. And so when you're interweaving two storylines, past and present in this case, it makes it even more powerful, because not only do you break the chapter at this climactic moment and not give the answer in the next chapter that would have been sequential, you go to the other character and you make the reader wait another chapter before they get the continuation of that. So it's something that I actually find easy to do, and it's fun. I'm a very nice person in real life, but I guess I do like to manipulate my readers. So what can I say?
Certainly makes it hard to put it down, because
Oh, thank you.
you want to get back to that thing. Let's talk about firearms are a huge part of this book. Each character has their own relationship, as it were, to firearms and rifles in particular. I'll just read a brief passage. And yes, as it happens, I do know quite a lot about rifles. As I sat on my grandfather's lap, he taught me each rifle's name and what it was used for. 22 long rifles for small game, Winchesters and Remingtons for medium game, larger rifles for wolf and deer, all the way up to the Mannlicher Schnauer, big bore capable of bringing down a rhino. Did you use guns growing up, or at any point? Or?
I've never touched a gun in my life. So those parts of my novels obviously have to be researched. Going back to the Marsh King's Daughter, this is a family that lives off the grid. So of course they do hunting and fishing. And so I had to watch a lot of really ugly YouTube videos, you know, of skinning animals. And I would go to discussion forums to get the language for, you know, shooting and hunting, because you can read an article about hunting and that's got, there's a remove. But if you know, hear people talking about it on discussion forums, you can pick up the tone of the language that they use. And so I was very intimidated to write my first scene where Helena kills her first deer at the age of 6. It happens in the winter because they have no respect for hunting laws. And I could easily write her, you know, walking across the frozen marsh and what the air feels like, and imagining the fish, you know, below her, and a crow cawing. All of that was fine. But, you know, to actually hold a gun and what it feels like to shoot it and then see the deer, that I know nothing about. So, but I wrote the scene, and when my writing partner at that time found out that I did not hunt, she had her husband, who does hunt, read it, and he gave it a thumbs up. So I was happy about that. And I think it's funny because much later, after The Marsh King's Daughter published, I was contacted by a DM at Facebook from an author who I don't know personally, and he writes what I call boy books, you know, military, shoot 'em up, you know, this sort of thing. And he told me that he was reading and enjoying The Marsh King's Daughter. And he said, he doesn't usually tell people this, but he said he's been an avid hunter all his life. And he said, when he read the scene where Helena is learning to track and where she shoots her first deer, he said, I knew you were a hunter too.
Well, you really pulled it off then.
I did. I did. I did not give away my secret. I guess I just did now. So, you know, if he's watching, sorry about that. So it's more by necessity. And the reason guns factor so heavily in The Wicked Sister, I was inspired by an incident that had happened a long time ago, but it just always stuck with me, which was a shooting accident that involved a toddler. And the toddler was sitting in his car seat behind his mother in the car, and he found a loaded handgun in her purse, shot and killed her. And I thought, you know, it, like I say, it always stuck with me. And I thought, what would it be like for that person? You know, as they grow up, at some point, this little boy was going to find out what he did. And, you know, how could you make that part of who you are? How do you come to terms with that and go forward even? And so that's what I wanted to explore. That's the core question that's driving Rachel is how did she get past this terrible accident that she thinks she's responsible for? And so, of course, you know, with that, guns are going to feature largely. So, and I postulate that the hunting lodge, where the lodge where they grow up, it was a former hunting lodge. And so, yes, there's a lot of taxidermy there. And there was a gun room. Obviously, when Diana's parents moved there, they cleared it out of all the guns, but that doesn't quite take care of it for them. So, yeah, it's just, I don't think there's guns in the next book, but we'll see. Maybe there will be.
Great. I'm gonna just check in with Brandy. Has anyone had any questions sent in to you?
Nope, not yet. I
Okay.
think everyone's kind of waiting to the end.
I have a couple that were emailed in from Ann Dahlman, and I'll just go through those. They relate more to the process of writing and being successful. So let me just run through those. Ann says, I'm a self-published author. What would you suggest as the next step to take to get into mainstream publishing? I've spoken to some people who told me that agents, publishers, etc., aren't willing to work with self-published authors to get them out into the mainstream. And I'm curious to find out if that's really true. Do you have an opinion?
My opinion, no, that's not true. It all comes down to the writing. When I was organizing writers' conferences, I knew a lot of literary agents. I know fewer now, but they're all looking for that next thing, that thing that gets them excited. And it's all about the writing. So your publishing history doesn't matter. In my case, for The Marsh King's Daughter, my early novels were published by a mainstream publisher, traditional publisher, but they didn't do particularly well. And anyone who's looking, any editor who wants to acquire a book can look at the author's track record and see what their past history is. That's why some authors, they might change their name at that point. They want to start their career fresh again without a history. However, my agent said that wasn't necessary in my case because the writing was so good that, you know, it would overcome that past history where, you know, the books only did so-so. And so that would be the case for a self-published author too. It's not a negative. It's nothing that's going to count against you. Everything comes down to the words on the page. So, you know, by all means, if you think your book, you know, the one that you're working on now is going to be the kind that would get publishers excited and would reach a wide audience, absolutely query agents. And you don't even have to tell them, you know, use self-publish. They're not interested in your history. They just want to read the book and find out if they fall in love with it or not.
That's great to hear. That's very encouraging. Now, I understand that, I mean, you've got a big publisher behind you, so maybe you don't have an answer for this, but what are some cost-effective ways that you can think of to promote a novel?
Yeah, you know, a lot of people think that having a publisher behind you means that the author doesn't have to do anything. I do get a lot of support, but yes, I do a lot on my own. The author is the one that knows their book the best, right? And so, you know, I'll suggest ideas for articles to my publicist. And it's true that I have the assistance of the publicist in placing these articles, you know, but I still write them like a personal essay, that kind of thing. So it's that's a really broad question. It's really kind of hard to narrow it down, but I'm a big believer in not putting a lot of money into the promotion. I would rather put my time in than, you know, invest in the cost. I've heard, you know, good things in regards to Facebook ads, but yeah, it's such an individual thing. Why don't we leave that to Carolyn Howard Johnson? She knows more about that than I do.
Well, thanks for that. She had another question. I don't know if you have an answer for this, but I'll just run it out there. She wanted to know if there were any specific managers or publishers that you could recommend that would be willing to work with self-published authors. It sounds like there probably isn't, but.
Well, again, you know, the fact of having been previously self-published, that is inconsequential. The best resource that I know of for finding agents is a website called agentquery.com. You know, so it's one word run together, agentquery.com. And that has a database of agents, and you can do a search on them by topic, by project interests. And they keep it current, and they're legitimate agents who are making sales and, you know, not gonna take advantage of a newer author. And so it's you want to narrow your search, yes, but at the same time you want to cast a broad net, because writing is so subjective, and you know what one agent likes, another might not, and so you just have to keep the faith in your project, and you know, query a lot of agents until you find that one that just loves what you wrote, and then you're on your way.
Great. I think I saw something pop up from Craig Brockman. Craig, do you have something?
Well, I was going to say he had two questions.
Okay. Go ahead, Craig.
Hey,
Hi.
can you hear me now?
I can. I like your avatar. That's beautiful.
Okay, super. I'd put my picture on here, but I just came in from working and I look like a mess. So anyway, the two questions, real quickly. The one is ebooks, and I read almost exclusively ebooks on Scribd, and so your book was one of the fabulous paper books that I read. And what is the hesitancy with publishers and authors with putting them on platforms like Scribd? Because it's frustrating. I can find most things, or Overdrive through my library I use too, but it's so hard to find ebooks. What is the philosophy there, I guess, is what I'm thinking.
Oh, I wish I knew more about that. I really don't have an answer for that. Is Scribd a free platform? Is that
No, it's a subscription. It's like $10 a month, and just about everything I read is on Scribd. And so, but it's kind of like Kindle, but it's yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's a subscription.
Well, I do know there's been a couple of times when I've suggested something to my publisher that seems to make sense to me, and then they've come along and explained why it doesn't work within the format of what they're doing. And, you know, there must be an answer like that for this here too, you know, because I do know that obviously they're interested in getting the word out about their books. You know, nobody can buy a book if they haven't heard about it. And, you know, they do a lot of, you know, traditional publishers give away a lot of advanced copies, you know, to create buzz around the book and so forth. So there must be a reason. Sorry, I can't answer it.
No problem. The only other one was because your book is so interesting in the format of in relation to the UP. I think that when I tried to agent my book, I got pushback because it was too regional. And I think maybe they're just being polite, but that's okay. And I've had super acceptance as far as people from out of the area and stuff that have really liked it and enjoy, just like your book, getting to know the UP. And not from my perspective, but from your perspective, I'd really like to know what your experience was trying to break down the door, trying to get stuff out there from the UP.
Yeah, well, my novels that got me my agent, I've been with my literary agent for 21 years. They were not initially set in the Upper Peninsula, and so I've always liked exotic places. So my first novel was set in Antarctica, and the next one was set at Chitan Volcano in northern Patagonia, Chile. And I only came to set the book in The Marsh King's Daughter in the Upper Peninsula because the story came to me, the character came to me in the night, and it just flowed, and it seemed like the right story to happen in the Upper Peninsula. But my agent didn't pitch it as a book set in the Upper Peninsula. At heart, The Marsh King's Daughter is a father-daughter story, you know? And so the setting, while certainly it's a major part of the book would not be the same if it was set anywhere else. I don't think initially that was part of his pitch, and oh, cool, it's set in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Probably not. You know, he was talking up other aspects of the story. So if you think the regional aspect was a turnoff, maybe just don't emphasize that in the query, and, you know, shift it to the characters, because it's really the characters that matter in the end anyway. And if you want, mention that yours is, I'm assuming yours is set in the Upper Peninsula also.
Yeah, it's self-published. I self-ended.
You know, say, hey, you know, author Karen Dionne has had great success with her book set in the UP.
All right.
Yeah, super.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Craig. Do we have anything else from our studio audience?
No one else has written or raised their hand.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Karen, for taking out an hour of your day on a beautiful Saturday in the middle of summer. I can't thank you enough, and it's been a lot of fun to talk to you again and hear what you're up to. And I cannot wait to
People don't have more
see your
questions.
third book set in Grand
You
Marais.
don't, you do have one? No.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Is another question? I hear some chatter in the background of another question possibly. Go right ahead. I'm here.
Sorry, Karen, I just didn't shut off my mute. So here it goes.
Okay, it's fine. Well, I really appreciate, the opportunity to talk to you. And I know that this was part of my keynote that I gave a year ago, but I just would like to re-emphasize that the two main things that I have learned from my experience, because I've been writing seriously for 20 years, and The Marsh King's Daughter, which was my breakout book, was my fourth published novel. And now, of course, it's going on from there. So the two main things I want to emphasize is if you're an aspiring writer, keep at it. Don't quit. There were a lot of times when over that 20-year period before The Marsh King's Daughter, I thought, well, maybe what I've had is as good as it's going to get. Maybe that's all I'm going to do, and I had a couple books published and mass market paperback. Yay. That was really fantastic. But I didn't quit. I kept writing, and look at what has happened since. So that is my number one takeaway. And then the number two takeaway is if you've been writing for a while and you're not seeing the results that you would like, either from querying or from maybe you're published with a small publisher and you'd like to step up to a big publisher, don't be afraid to change what you write. Just because a person starts writing in a particular genre in a particular way doesn't mean that's where your strengths lie. My early books were not bad books, but the psychological suspense that I write now, quality-wise, they're a huge step up from what I was writing before. So if I hadn't been willing to change what I'd been doing and try some writing techniques that were new to me, like handling a dual storyline. I had never done that in my early books.
Oh.
And, using flashbacks and how do you incorporate, past and present and all of these different things that I had to learn how to use those techniques in order to tell the stories that I wanted to tell. But in the process, I discovered that I was a better writer than I realized. So that would be my other thing. Don't be afraid to try something new. Don't think that just because, I've been writing this mystery series for 3 years and of course I'm going to write mysteries, consider changing it, and you might find a strength in an area that you didn't realize that you had. So I hope that, overall the conversation has been encouraging, and yeah, I look forward to seeing your names on the New York Times bestseller list.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Great. I can't think of a better way to wrap this up. Again, thank you on behalf of the whole UPPAA board and everyone. And we wish you every success with The Wicked Sister launching August 4th in bookstores around the world.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right,
Thank you.
bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Enjoy the rest of the day.